Hi, everybody. My name is Robynne Edgar, and I'm an herbalist and a traditional medicine educator. And I'm so happy to be here to teach you guys about stinging nettle today from beautiful Cowichan territory. Before we get started with the slideshow, I would like my son Coleman to introduce himself.
My name's Coleman. I'm 11 years old, about to turn 12, and I play a little bit too much music, but I think that's okay.
There's never too much music, I don't think, Coleman. Okay, so I'm going to attempt to screen share here. We're going to get into the presentation. And yes. Marvelous. All right. First things first. So stinging nettle, the superhero of plants, and that honestly couldn't be more true. It is my favorite plant to teach about. So thank you again for joining us today. Again, my name is Robynne Edgar. Sorry, skipped ahead too quick there. Coming to you from Cowichan territory once again, and my ancestry is Cree, Métis, and Japanese. And sorry we're not coming to you live, but we will be zooming in live for a brief Q&A afterwards. So I hope that you'll have lots of questions for us afterwards. Next, I just really want to acknowledge the amazing teachers and inspirational folks that I've learned from, including Jerry Oldman, who I know is doing many workshops and possibly even doing some emceeing for you all over the next few days. And Uncle Jerry is one of the most special people to me in my life. And every time the two of us have a conversation, he teaches me about 50 things without even knowing it. So I'm sure you've all experienced the same thing with Jerry. And also my two teachers that I learned under in herbalism school, Jessie Delman, as well as Elise Crone, and the amazing, inspirational ethnobotanist, Nancy Turner. And last but not least, my parents. So my mom is the one who really instilled my passion for wild foods and medicine into me at a really, really young age. Like Coleman, he was about 5 when he started, but I was a little younger than that. And I would go mushroom pickings in the mountain or seaweed harvesting and crabbing in the ocean. We grew up Tsawwassen territory. So she really instilled that in me. And then my father, of course, because my father is amazing. He raised 3 girls patiently, and we'll just leave it at that. So in 30 minutes, we have a lot to cover. Actually, I should have set my timer, but I just made a note of the time. First of all, we're going to start about talking about some of the plant identifications associated with stinging nettles. And then we're going to talk about nettles as food, medicine, plant technology. And Coleman's going to share some foraging basics with you. So stinging nettle, here they are in all their beauty. I just love this plant, if you haven't noticed already. And I'm sure if you haven't seen stinging nettle, you've most likely been stung by them. The Latin name is Urtica dioica, and the reason why Latin names are so important, I used to think that it was quite pretentious to call plants by their Latin name, but there's a very good reason why you do so, and that's so you could have proper identification, because there's way too many different common names for one plant. Sage as an example, we'll call it wormwood, mugwort, white sage, you name it, so many different names. So when you're using plants for food or medicine, it's really important that you get the right plant for obvious reasons. Nettles can be found literally everywhere. I actually just got stung by one today. I was cleaning up my blueberry patch and one was popping up already here in February. But I've seen them in the forests, I've seen them in open fields, parks, ditches. And the reason why I decided to talk about them today is because they are starting to grow outside your door. And I hope that by the end of this presentation that you'll all feel quite comfortable and confident harvesting them on your own. So there's a lot of debate on whether or not stinging nettle is native. I like to believe they are because they're super beneficial to the environment. They contribute to biodiversity. And that just means that they are beneficial to insects, and those insects are beneficial to other things, and so on and so on. And I always think that if something comes from a natural environment, then it's just sort of natural that they're probably native. But I know a lot of people out there will disagree with me. But what I do know for sure is that I love stinging nettles, and that's all that really matters. So I can't talk about plants ever, especially if they have a lookalike. So it wouldn't be prudent of me to not talk about the lookalikes. So for stinging nettle, here's some of the lookalikes that are associated with them. And luckily none of them are poisonous. But you'll see in the middle there is hedge nettle. And this is almost always found in forests. You can use it for sore muscles. My friend Stella always makes a liniment, like a spray, an athletic spray for her family. They're soccer players, and she just swears by it. I personally have never used it. It really doesn't speak to me, this plant, mainly because it's really stinky. Hey, Coleman?
It's nasty.
It's really stinky. And then the plant on the far right is dead or purple nettle.
Nastier.
Even nastier. And that's actually used more as a wild green in salads. But yeah, they're both really stinky. But I always encourage people to try something at least once, and you be the judge and see what you think. And I'm sure that the dead or purple nettle, lots of people eat it. I'm sure it tastes better than it smells. But if you're ever in doubt, what you can do is just pinch the leaves, and if it's false or hedge nettle or dead or purple nettle, you'll know right away by the smell. And if it's stinging nettle, you'll know right away by the sting. And here is another just beautiful example of how this plant can look a little bit different. Sometimes you'll see, if you can see the picture on the left, they're a little redder, and and then you find them in dense patches like on the right. They're a little bit prickly, more prickly looking. So stinging nettles can look like hearts, as you saw on the other page. They can be dense and red, they can be green. I think, and my teacher always talks about that, when they're red, they're probably higher in flavonoids and antioxidants. And flavonoids are really just plant chemicals that help your body to ward off toxins. We also say it's like a landing patch, like an airplane, so that insects have a place to go, and that's why they're red. And the elders, like the red nettles, apparently they're very, very prized. So nettle medicine. Nettle is anti-inflammatory, it's an antihistamine, it's an amazing cure for arthritis. Well, not cure, but it really helps your arthritis. It's a blood cleanser if taken internally. It's a bone builder, it's a diuretic, and that means it makes you pee. So it can support your liver and your kidneys as a result. And the parts used are the leaves, stalks, seeds, and it says toots there. That's actually tools. That's a really bad typo.
Not a typo, you just
I guess so. So some of the medicinal properties for this are, I like to make a tincture, and it's an extract, some people will call it. And that's basically out of just the fresh leaf, and you put it into an alcohol, a glycerin, or an apple cider vinegar base. And you can use that around this time for January, February. You can start taking that for your allergies, and even take it year round if you want, because I find here on Vancouver Island, allergies are prevalent all year round. And one other thing, really cool thing, is that the leaf has the natural antihistamine, but there's also histamine in the nettle. So it's an antihistamine, but it has histamine, and the histamine is what actually causes the reaction in your body when you get stung. So that's kind of crazy. And what causes the sting is something called a formic acid. And that's found in the little hairs underneath the leaves, the stalks, the stems, pretty much everywhere except for the top of the leaf. If we were here today in person, I'd probably want you to all share your stories, your favorite stories about when you've been stung by nettle, because I feel like a lot of us, especially as young kids or adults like today, have been stung by nettles. And I'm not going to tell you how to help a nettle sting, because I don't want to steal Coleman's thunder. He's going to be talking to you about that a little bit later. So other uses for stinging nettles are the elders, and maybe you have folks in your families really like to flog themselves, which is like whipping. So you grab a stalk of nettles with gloves, and you literally like whip somebody my friend Carolyn has me do it to her every spring when they first come out. At first it was very uncomfortable, but now that I'm used to it, and it really, really helps. You start to feel that pulsating, almost just like when you're at the physiotherapist and you kind of feel that zzz. That's exactly what it starts to feel like after you've been flogged by nettles, that you're at the physiotherapist's office, but it's natural. One day I decided when I was in herbalism school that I couldn't really recommend that if I hadn't tried it myself. So I flogged myself. Actually, I've done that before too, but my friend flogged my back, and it's just a huge area. And it was not a good idea because I broke out in hives that lasted over a week. So I think for me, the next time, maybe I'll do it to my knee because I have knee issues, but I don't think I'll do it to a huge part of my body that I can't really reach with medicines to neutralize the sting. So nettles as food and nutrition. This is my favorite way to use nettles. And you can see on the right-hand side, this is a nettle seasoning. And I love to use the seasoning over my rice and my fish. And what it is just dried leaves and roasted sesame seeds powdered up. And you can add sea salt, or you can use dried seaweed instead of sea salt. And it's super, super nutritious. Nettles have been deemed a superfood because they are highly nutritious. They're a tonic, so something that you can use every day to build a really strong nutritional foundation for yourself. And other ways that you can use nettles are for pesto fresh, or you can blanch them and squeeze them out and stick them in ice cube trays as shown here, and just keep them for future use in the freezer. So what we like to do is I keep a bunch of frozen nettle ice cubes in our freezer. And I used to be really tricky when these guys were young and put them in their smoothies because you can't really tell. And they're so high in so many vitamins and minerals. But now they're on to me, but they love stinging nettles just as much as I do. My older son, who's not with us today, and Coleman, of course. But the way you can get rid of the sting is if you blanch them in hot water just for about 30 seconds. And drying them also gets rid of most of the sting, but there'll still be like a little bit if you touch them with your hands. But when you make nettle tea, you can put just the boiling water and that neutralizes the sting right away. And speaking of tea, you can see a really great example of nettle tea just on the top right-hand side. And the one on the top, the super green one, is nettle that's steeped for overnight. And the one below is just a tea steeped for about 30 minutes. And that's just a massive difference. If you really want to draw out the minerals of stinging nettles, then I would recommend steeping it overnight, and you get the chlorophyll. That's why it's so bright green like that. And I mean, it's still amazing for you if you steep it for a minimum of 20 minutes, but I do like to steep mine overnight. And if you're using nettles for food, I have the picture on the left that just shows you kind of that's the scale for size. And that's about the size you want them for food. So the next slide is, it's probably really hard for you guys to see, but I really like it because it shows just how nutritious nettles can be. And you'll see on the far left, like they've got the calcium, magnesium, iron. And the one I really want to focus on here, the magnificent one, is how much iron, like how much it just kicks ass on kale. So it's about 20 times higher in iron than kale. And we today know of kale and spinach is like a superfood, but wild foods just really kick butt on them. Dandelion root, dandelion leaves. And I'll give you guys a copy of this presentation, or I'll have Savannah maybe send and share the presentation with you. You can also use the seeds for stinging nettle. They're super nutritious as well and really high in omegas, like a lot of nuts and seeds. And I wanted to show you the example of the stinging nettles on the far left, or the seeds that aren't quite ready to harvest. And the one on the bottom right, they get a little bit brown and red tinged, almost like that one nettle I showed you earlier. And that's when they're okay for picking. And you can dry them and put them in soups. And I just would recommend not eating them dry and without, again, maybe putting some boiling water on them, because you can get a little bit stung from them. I put them on a salad once and it wasn't a very good idea. It was not. And this was my nettle root harvest this year. And luckily I have a friend who has 5 acres, and I just was able to harvest the most beautiful root you can see there on the right. Without getting into too much information, nettle root is most known to help support the prostate, especially for BPH, benign prostatic hyperplasia, or prostate inflammation. And it's a man's medicine. So I was able to make an extract in a whiskey, and I think it's one of the best things that I've ever made. I hope that I don't know anybody that needs the medicine, but I know one day, unfortunately, I will, because it's quite a common problem for men these days. And Jerry, the other day, I had called Jerry, and he told me that you can chew on the root to calm nerves. So I probably should have done that before this presentation. But I don't have any nettle root fresh to chew on, but I'm really excited about trying that. And nettle as a plant technology, this is my friend Elise, and she was my first teacher, or first herbalism teacher, and she's a whiz at making the nettle fiber. And here's just a couple examples of how beautiful the rope can be. And it's so miraculous because nettle is really revered for how strong it is, but also how long it lasts. They have found stinging nettle rope and fishing rope and nets in the ocean that are over 1,000 years old, still intact. And I'm going to attempt to share a video, and this is just a little bit of an example of her weaving the rope.
Keep twisting, and it's going to get tension on it, and it's going to naturally want to buckle, right?
Yeah.
So,
and then what does that buckle become?
And then that buckle becomes, let me get that woody part out. That becomes my loop. So I'm going to go like this, and then if I go like that.
So just an example of her actually weaving it together. We made necklaces and bracelets, and this is the stalk on the left-hand side. And you actually roll that out, and it breaks up into 4 little segments you can almost see there. And there's a whole lot of stuff you have to do after that. Like I say, I'm not an expert, but maybe that's something you guys can put on the evaluation forms that you want another workshop, and we'll come back in the summer with Elise and do a workshop on nettle bracelets and necklaces for you guys. So harvesting wild foods and medicines, we're going to move into here. And I love these pictures so much. They're such great examples of what harvesting medicine does for my spirit personally. It's also a great way to get physically active. So whether you're lunging to harvest berries or seaweed, or jumping for fir tips like Coleman in the top left there, harvesting is a physical activity and one of my favorite things to do, especially with this guy over here, my harvesting buddy. And some things to consider when you go out harvesting are, the cultural protocols is really important. Whose land am I on? Do I have permission to be on this land? How can I give back to the land? And your own spiritual practices. Some people will have a plant sit and they'll ask the plant for permission before they harvest. Other people will offer tobacco. And whatever feels right to you, there's no right or wrong way. It's how you acknowledge. I'm more of like a sort of a silent person, and I'll have my own moment with the plant rather than saying something out loud, but other people will sing. So really, again, just whatever feels right to you. And the environment is really huge with nettles, to just be really careful where you're harvesting from, because stinging nettles are what they call a bioaccumulator. And that just means that they easily absorb toxins and chemicals and other heavy metals. So you have to really be careful that you're not, harvesting from maybe where there used to be a gas station or industry up the road, or a place maybe where dogs pee, like a dog park or something. Just really be aware of the environment that you're harvesting any plant, but especially stinging nettle. And another thing to consider is the sustainability of the plant. Is it endangered? Is it growing in abundance? Is it healthy? Have I harvested in this area before? I like to give my nettle patches a year break. I try not to visit them year after year, and I find that they do quite well as a result. And another thing that should be obvious, but isn't always, is how am I going to use this plant? I have actually seen people take plants and kind of sacred plants out of the forest, and they'll bring it to me and say, "Oh, what am I supposed to do with this?" And that drives me crazy. But just always have a plan for the plant that you're harvesting. I'm sure I don't have to tell any of you that. Another really important thing to consider when you're harvesting is processing time. And it's a very common mistake, and I have been guilty of it many, many times. I love to show this slide because it's a very good friend of mine, Amanda DeFay. And we were harvesting medicines up in Kitimat territory one year, and we were up till about 2 a.m. processing. And that is not the first time I've been up all night processing in order to honor the plant that I've just harvested. So next, Coleman, who's been waiting so patiently beside me here, is going to talk a little bit about foraging and what you need for that. Do you want me to move over, Coleman?
No, that's fine.
Okay.
So usually the main things you'll need for harvesting are scissors or clippers for cutting the nettles, a bag or a basket for carrying them. You'll always need offerings and good intentions, because if you don't have that, the plant will be kind of mad at you. But a compass, especially if you're in a forest or you can get lost. Gloves so you don't get stung. Long pants, sleeves, and probably boots. Also so you don't get stung. And definitely snacks and water.
I like to have snacks, especially if you're a parent and you're out harvesting with your kids and you want to stay long and not have to go back for the excuse of hunger. Just a little tip. It's a good idea to pack snacks always.
I never use that excuse. I just get to use that excuse. This is a fact. How to harvest stinging nettles. So usually when you harvest, you go to the top of the plant, and if it's too old, and if it's not too old, you take the first 2 rows of the leaves down from the top to the bottom 2 rows, and then you cut that off, and you continue to cut in every area that you find. You usually would harvest in the mornings, so it's not that wilted, or you can harvest later, around 5 or 6 probably. And if you get stung, which has happened
a lot,
too many times, you would find plantain, which is this, it's otherwise known as frog leaf. It's kind of this little green plant that has these stripes through them. And if you chew that up and then put it on the sting, it'll go away within seconds. People have used slugs for this because slugs mostly eat native plants, and their slime is healing. But that's kind of disgusting to me. So
I do know people who have tried slug, and they swear by it. And it numbs you too. But yeah, I don't need to try that.
Ooh, this is a big one.
Do you want me to do this one?
Yeah.
Okay. So just in terms of processing, when we get home from harvesting our nettles, we will lay them out immediately because, like I mentioned before, insects love stinging nettles. And so we'll just lay them out spaced and just give them an hour or 2 for those little bugs to crawl off of them, just in a cool place so they don't get wilted. And then depending on what you're going to use them for, you'll want to snip off the leaf and the stem. If you're using it for food, or if you're using it for tea, I personally just use the leaf. And if you're using it for food, of course, you wash right away. If you're using it for tea, you dry them right away. And how do you dry them?
So usually when you're drying all of your plants in general, really, you can have a drying rack, which you can get from Lee Valley. There are 2 sizes. One of them's pretty small, one of them's quite large. We have both, I think.
Yeah, I have about 3 of them.
And then usually for like a week or so, you would just hang them up, put all your stuff in, and then just put a fan on it and keep it rotating and make sure to move through it so all of them get dried. Or you can use the paper bag method. And usually you fill them about 1/3 of the way. And then if you just shake them a couple times a day. And usually when you're drying, you'll want them out of the sun so they don't wilt when they dry, so they crack really easily or something.
Yeah, and a good dried herb will look very similar to what it looks like fresh, to be still really whole and keeping its color.
And do's and don'ts. So this is a good one. You should always go with someone experienced, especially when you're just starting, because most plants have lookalikes. Some are very poisonous, or some can be quite sacred. This is a very good example of lookalikes. So
Such a good example.
This one on the top left is called yarrow. That's the one that we use mostly. It's used for bleeding and stuff.
So another workshop.
The one on the top right is called Queen Anne's lace. It's called that because it's supposed to have a drop of blood in the middle from Queen Anne when it dropped on a flower.
Wow, I'm impressed that you remember that.
I think that's 5. And then water hemlock, the one that you do not want to touch.
Yeah, that's
whatsoever.
This one.
It's very, very poisonous, and it will give your skin some very bad everything, to be honest.
Yeah, blisters.
And Osha, this is a very sacred plant. Our family doesn't use it very much, but we know a lot of people who do use it. So yeah, next.
Yeah, so just the point being, these plants look super similar. They can go from sacred to medicinal to super poisonous. So really just make sure that you know your plant 100%.
Another do is you should always save some for the birds and bees, or else there will be no more left for us. And always save some for the future generations also.
Good one.
Never, ever, ever take more than you need, or else the world will get mad at you.
Grumpy world. Just like grumpy cat.
Grumpier.
Most important rule?
When in doubt, throw it out, because it's never, ever worth it.
So true. Well, I think that's it for us. And I have to plug my social media pages here. I do have Instagram and Facebook, and it's Wild About Plants. And what I do, I try to educate a lot about sustainability. I share recipes and just all sorts of crazy plant information.
And I'm there too.
And Coleman is on there too, our foraging adventures. So follow us if you like. And thank you so much for joining us. And we look forward to zooming in live in just a couple seconds. See you soon.